Hello, and welcome to episode one of The Taxi Squad, a Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast. I am your host, Dan Fetzner, and if you know anything about me, you know that me and technology do not get along. I've been trying to record this podcast since Labor Day, and let's just say we have been having some IT issues. But the NFL season kicking off tonight, it is crunch time, and I want to make sure that I go on record before the season officially begins. So we're going to knock this out right now and get rolling with our season preview. I'm going to give you some of my predictions for the year ahead. And then later this week, I'll drop what I call episode 0, where I'll explain, what this podcast is all about, what makes Dynasty Fantasy Football different from regular fantasy football, and why it's the best way to play. And also answer the question, what is a taxi squad, for those of you not familiar with the Dynasty format and wondering why this show is called the Taxi Squad. In the meantime, if you play fantasy football of any kind and you want to get some insights as to what's been happening throughout training camp leading up to the season, what players you should be looking to roster going into the season, in particular, sleepers for people in deeper and more competitive leagues, then you're going to want to tune for the next 20-30 minutes to get an edge on everybody else in your league. And just a heads up, we might hear a dog barking, but I can only do so many takes, so if we do, that's just going to be part of the show. And with that, let's jump right in. So since it's the very first episode of the year, we're going to do a bit of a season preview, like I mentioned. It's going to have a little bit of a different format than our weekly episodes. First, we're going to talk about a few of the biggest stories from training camp heading into the season this year. Then we'll discuss the injury report and how you can best navigate any possible injuries to your team. And then I'm going to go through by position and talk about some sleepers that I like that you may have heard of, as well as some really deep sleepers that you may not have heard of, but should definitely be on your radar. And then we're going to wrap up with our Taxi Squad segment, which are sleepers that are so deep that they probably won't even be playing this year, but are still worth a stash on your Taxi Squad due to their potential. So let's kick things off with preseason risers and follows. First up, we have Jacory Krosky-Merritt, a.k.a. Bill. Of course, we can't talk about training camp risers without talking about the rookie running back from the Washington Commanders, Jacory Krosky-Merritt, or as he goes by, Bill, which is just a phenomenal nickname. If you play fantasy, I'm sure you've already heard of him by now. He's gone from an undrafted in fantasy drafts to now a mid-round pick. It's a really cool story, but I'm sorry, the hype, it's just gone too far. He's being drafted in fantasy like he is the new running back one in Washington. But sadly, I don't think he's the RB1 or the RB2 or maybe even the RB3. Honestly, at his cost, I would rather have Austin Eckler or Chris Rodriguez. Bill may eventually have some long-term value in Dynasty, who knows? But historically, it's unlikely. The only other 7th round pick to ever be fantasy relevant is Isaiah Pacheco. So one guy ever. Not a great track record. At the price that he costs now, I think you just got to stay away from Bill, unfortunately. Next, we're headed to Dallas. We're talking about George Pickens, one of the biggest risers this preseason, and a former Pittsburgh Steeler who was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Everybody is so high on Pickens, and I get it. The dude is an athlete, but when Mike Tomlin has a star wide receiver in their prime and he trades them away seemingly out of nowhere, the wheels fall off 100% of the time at their new destination. It's not a matter of it's not a matter of if, but when. Antonio Brown, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson literally just got cut by the Browns last week and is now probably out of the league. So why does anybody think things with George Pickens are going to be any different? I'm giving it 1 year max until Pickens has a meltdown. So, if you got him, wait till maybe halfway through the season when he's tearing it up in Dallas and his value skyrockets, and then sell high and get out while you still can. Now let's head to Jacksonville. oof, this situation, we got a three-headed monster down in the backfield in Jacksonville with Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, and Byshell Tootin. Generally, with a situation like this, I would say just stay away. Don't draft any of them. But Liam Cohen coming in to coach this team after he turned around the Tampa Bay Bucks running room last year, everybody's hoping that he can recreate that magic in Jacksonville and wants a piece of the action. If I was going to take a shot, personally, I like Travis Etienne. He's a former first-round pick, 2 years removed from being the overall running back 3 in fantasy, so he's done it before. And honestly, worst case scenario, if Etienne doesn't win the job and Co decides to go with one of the other running backs, I think the Jags trade Etienne to a team that needs an RB1, like a Dallas or a Houston. So regardless, if you have Etienne, I think you're going to get starting running back value at, backup running back price. Let's head down to Nolens to discuss this next duo, Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough. Really, honestly, I don't feel like talking about this. I have a whole thing written, but they are both terrible. They were one of the biggest stories, or at least the longest stories throughout training camp, because they were battling for the QB1 spot with the Saints. But neither one of them is going to be the quarterback by next year. And whoever's the quarterback this year is going to be worthless, even in Superflex. Seriously, I would rather start another running back or a wide receiver in my Superflex spot than either of these dudes. So let's just move on. And speaking of gross QB battles, the Indianapolis Colts. Daniel Jones recently named the starter. Honestly, I think that is the best possible thing that could have happened for Anthony Richardson, and the best possible thing that could have happened to anybody who catches passes for the Indianapolis Colts. So Anthony Richardson was drafted 2 years ago as a project. He was not NFL ready, and the Colts knew that when they drafted him, but then they started him immediately as if he was NFL ready, and they couldn't figure out why he was failing. He needed the Jordan Love treatment, where he sits for a couple of years behind a vet, learns the game before actually playing. And now he has that. So everybody who's thinking that Anthony Richardson's career is over now that Daniel Jones has won the job, and I disagree. I think this might be the only thing that actually saves his job. In fact, if you're in a dynasty league, I think you should go figure out who in your league used a first-round pick to draft Anthony Richardson 2 years ago, because they probably hate him and are fed up with him by now. And if you wait till maybe halfway through the season, when Daniel Jones is still the quarterback in New York, make him a trade offer. See if you can get Richardson on the cheap. There's always a chance that AR might never turn into anything, but he very well, he might. There's always a chance AR might not ever turn it into anything. Okay. There's always a chance that AR might never turn into anything. He very well might just be bad at football, but his fantasy upside is so high that if he's able to figure out, it's worth at least taking a shot. Now let's quickly run through some of the injury stories and the fantasy implications they're going to have heading into the season. The biggest one, I think, is the Bucs. Chris Godwin, I love him, but it turns out that his injury might be as bad as it looked, or even worse, as it seems like it required a second surgery recently. And honestly, at this point, you'd kind of just have to wonder if this might end up being a lost year for Godwin, even if he does return. And then Jalen McMillan, their other receiver, is starting the season on IR because he had a severely sprained spine. These are two serious injuries to a couple of guys that the Bucs were banking on playing big roles in their offense this year. If you follow fantasy, you probably already heard by now about their first-round pick, Emeka Egbuka. I don't know if I'm saying that right, out of Ohio State, but dude is playing lights out in camp. He looks like he is going to be the primary guy to come in and make up for the lost production from Godwin and McMillan. I don't know if I'd really consider him even a sleeper anymore, but definitely somebody worth taking a look at if you are interested in the Bucs offense. 49ers. Now, similar to Chris Godwin, I think this is going to be a lost season for the 49ers' Brandon Ayuk, who's coming back from knee surgery. Their wide receiver, to Jawan Jennings, has also been sitting out all preseason due to a calf injury that I'm almost certain is fake, and it sounds like the coach thinks that as well. Enter second-year receiver Ricky Pearsall. He missed the start of his rookie season last year because he got shot in the chest during an attempted robbery in San Francisco. Thanks, Joe Biden. Pearsall was back in uniform after being shot by week 7, and he even had a huge few games to end the season. He was a first-round pick for the 49ers last year, so they've invested big draft capital in him, and he showed that he can produce as a wide receiver 1 in one of the top offenses in the league, where they don't really have any other wide receivers to throw to. Ricky Pearsall, I think, is the future of the 49ers passing game. And he's being somewhere drafted around like wide receiver 35 or 40 this year, when he could easily be putting up top 10 wide receiver numbers for the next 5 years. Now down to Houston, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon on an NFI, non-football injury list, which means that he got hurt doing something it's not even football related, which also means he's not getting paid, and he's not going to be able to play till an undetermined amount of time. So I don't know what we're going to see from Mixon this season, if we see anything at all. But the Texans' backups are Nick Chubb and Dameon Pierce, who are uninspiring to say the least. For dynasty purposes, however, I do like Woody Marks, who's a rookie out of USC and is a great receiving back. It doesn't sound like he's quite NFL ready yet, but he could definitely play a bigger role in the offense either later this season or in the coming years. Down in South Carolina, the Panthers just placed wide receiver Jalen Coker on IR to start the season. And then they went out and re-signed a 29-year-old Hunter Renfrow, who until a few months ago was running his family's recycling business in South Carolina. That might sound crazy, but Renfrow is a straight baller. He had been a former Pro Bowl wide receiver back in Oakland, but then he was out of the league because he had an undisclosed sickness that ended up being ulcerative colitis. He's now back and he's getting a shot at redemption. And while, it might take a few games for him to get his sea legs back, he's a starter for the Carolina Panthers. And I think he can be a contributor, especially in PPR leagues. And, in Dynasty, he's going to essentially be free since he's a little bit older. So if you're like me and you're contending to win your league title this season, he's worth a stash on your bench for a few weeks to see how things shake out. And if he can return to form, he could be a contributor this year. Last up, we're going down to South Beach, taking our talents to South Beach, Miami Dolphins. Achane, the running back, was hurt all preseason. Seems like he's going to be ready to start the regular season, so that's not actually the story. The story is his presumed backup, the second-year guy, Jalen Wright. He's a fraud. The word is out. And I think the Dolphins knew he was a fraud, too, because this year they went and drafted Ollie Gordon, who 2 years ago at Oklahoma State won the Doak Walker Award, which is the award for the best running back in all of college football. Other past winners, to name a few, Ashton Jeanty, Bijan Robinson, Ken Walker, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry. You get the point. Gordon's draft capital fell because he stayed in school another year, and that next year his team was just not any good. It really wasn't his fault. It was a function of the team. The talent is still there, and he now looks like he's the backup to Achane. And not only that, he might play a supplemental role like Raheem Mostert did back in 2023 when a 31-year-old Mostert scored 21 touchdowns as the goal line back. Now, as with all Dolphins players, their success is entirely dependent on if Tua can stay healthy at quarterback. So cross your fingers and hope for the best. I got a phone call that's ringing in my ears. I don't know if you can hear that since I can hear it through my headphones. We're learning here, folks. We're learning as we go. All right. That's all for injuries. Next up, we're doing a quick segment where we fade the public. Zig when everybody else zags. We're looking at what the public looks, and we're just going to go the opposite. So while we're in Miami, we just talked about him. Everybody's kind of over the Miami offense. But 2 years ago, they were unbelievable, full of league winners. Tyreek, Waddle, Achane. Even when Tua plays, you know, they're elite, he's elite. As long as Tua is playing, all of these guys could potentially win you your league. And Tua is actually basically free right now, and the rest of these guys are going well under their value, the value they could produce, and where they would have been taken last year. You know, this is what the Bros at Surf Lodge would refer to as an arbitrage opportunity. So don't miss out. We're going to try that one again. Next up, we're doing another segment where we fade the public. You know, we're going to zig when everybody zags. Basically, we're going to look at any take that the public seems unanimous on, and we're going the other direction because the public is always wrong. Let's stay in Miami, so we were just talking about. Everyone is just kind of over them. But 2 years ago, they were unbelievable, full of league winners. Tyreek, Waddle, Achane. You know, when Tua plays, these guys are all elite, as is Tua, who's basically free right now, and these guys are all going well under the draft positions that they can produce at. So, you know, this is what the Bros at Surf Lodge would refer to as an arbitrage opportunity. Don't miss out. Ooh, next up is Breece Hall. I don't even like this bet. I hate that I'm saying this. But that's how out everybody is on Breece Hall, who was the RB2 overall just 2 years ago. And, you know, while he disappointed last year relative to his ADP, he still averaged 13 to 14 points a game. You know, I think the Braylon Allen timeshare worries are justified, but a bit overblown. In worst case, Breece Hall's going to get you a ton of catches. Yeah. Also, he's only 24 years old. He's younger than R.J. Harvey, who was the rookie that the Broncos just drafted this year. So, buy the dip, especially in dynasty PPR leagues. Next one, I don't think is going to be a popular opinion, but you got to fade Josh Downs. I like Josh Downs. I think he's going to be a fine player, but everybody in the fantasy community loves this dude. They are so confident that he is the next big thing in fantasy football that, I'm sorry, it can't possibly work out. When everybody universally agrees on something like this, it's always wrong. That's just how life works. You know, I know he has an elite target rate and a great yards per route run and yada yada yada. Like, it doesn't matter. If everybody likes him, it's just not gonna work. And don't get me wrong, I think he'll probably have a decent year, but he's not going to be anywhere near this elite status tag that people are putting on him. And honestly, personally, I think Michael Pittman is the better pick on his team. I don't even think he's the best on his team. You know, Pittman's not flashy, but he usually catches between 80 to 100 balls, puts up like 1,000 yards, and more importantly, nobody's hyping him up. He's cheap, he's reliable. You know, last year he played with a broken back and still had a decent year. So, you know, if you're going to go with a Colts wide receiver, I would take Pittman over Downs. Now we're going to Cleveland. Oh my God, I have so much written about Cleveland. I don't know why. Well, the first one I know why, because Jerry Jeudy. After 5 years in the league, Jerry Jeudy has one decent season, and everybody is all in on this guy. I don't get it. Like, I got a secret. It wasn't him. It was Jameis Winston. Jameis turns nobodies into fantasy stars. And, you know, I like Joe Flacco. I see that there's comparisons to him and Jameis, but he's Jameis light at best. Cedric Tillman is kind of in the same boat where, you know, he benefited from the Jameis effect, but he's only a second-year guy, so I think it's all right to take a shot with him. But without Jameis, Jeudy is a bum. Also, Isaiah Bond, you know, not a bad flyer if you don't have issues drafting morally questionable characters, but, you know, if that's the case, you probably just would have to avoid drafting all Browns altogether. Let's see. Oh, another. So this is an aside. The Browns open the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. Everybody in the world thinks the Browns are going to get their doors blown off. Don't fall for it. The Bengals start every season 1-4. Every single year under Zach Taylor. They stink to start the season, but for some reason, every year we forget, and then we all bitch and moan when they lose to the Pats in week 1 and knock us out of our survivor pools. So do yourself a favor. You don't have to bet on the Browns. Just don't bet on the Bengals. All right? No betting on the Bengals to start the season until they've won at least 3 games. It's a rule going forward. One more thing about in Cleveland, running backs. All right, everyone's out on Cleveland's run game for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, because the one thing Cleveland's always been able to do consistently under Stefanski is run the ball. They drafted 2 young stud running backs because they want to run the ball. They have a great defense. They have no QB. They're gonna run the ball. Now, if you want to steer clear Quinshon Judkins, even though you can probably get on the cheap, I'd say get over yourself. But hey, I get it. Seems like he might have some issues. But Dylan Sampson is still there and will probably be getting even more work because of the Quinshon Judson incident. So I'd say grab either of those rookies at a discount while you still can. I think the Browns are going to be better than people expect. As do I think will be the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers. And I hate writing this as well, in particular the Rodgers part. But I'm going to go on a limb and say I don't think he's going to be bad as we all think he's going to be. That's sadly as far as I could go because it's still an Arthur Smith offense. But Rodgers is another year removed from his Achilles injury. And he sneaky put up some decent numbers last year with the Jets. The Steelers went 10-7 last year with Russ at QB. And I'm pretty sure they went 10-7 the year before with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph at QB. I mean, the team is better this year. They have a better QB, better offense, better defense. They always finish above 500. I think they're going to win 10 games and make the playoffs. I'm still worried somehow Arthur Smith will find a way to ruin every Steelers player's fantasy value. But besides DK Metcalf, they're all super cheap. So it might still be worth taking a late round flyer on someone like a Roman Wilson, Jaylen Warren, or Caleb Johnson. And our last zig when everyone zags. This one is probably one that I'm going to get wrong, but I really hope I'm right. I think the New York Giants aren't going to be as bad as everyone thinks they are, both in real life and in fantasy. So I know they've got this really tough schedule. It's supposed to be the hardest in the league, but Cowboys, who they play twice a year, just traded away Micah Parsons for God knows why. That looks like a lot easier 2 games than they had before. The Giants' defensive front was already solid. They added Abdul Carter out of Penn State, who looks like he is going to be a problem. So if the defense can keep these games close, they can lead on the run game, which I think is going to be surprisingly good with Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterbo. Russ can do enough to feed Neighbors, and honestly, if he struggles, it seems like Dart might be ready to come in and step in play, sooner than people are anticipating. However, what we all really want, what we all need, God willing, is for Jameis Winston to somehow make it in the starting lineup for at least a portion of the season. Because pairing him with Neighbors and Tracy and Scatterbo would be unreal. I don't know how many games they would actually win in real life, but they would for sure win some people a lot of fantasy games. And if he's not going to play and he's just going to sit there as QB3, trade him. Please, free Jameis. That dude needs to be a starter someplace. And honestly, the world would be a better place if we all had a little more Jameis Winston in our lives. All right. Now we're getting down to what everybody is looking for, the inside knowledge, the sleepers. First, we're going to start with quarterbacks. And to be clear, most of the quarterbacks we're going to discuss probably won't even get drafted in a 1 QB standard redraft league. But in a dynasty league, in particular a Superflex dynasty league, which means you can start 2 quarterbacks, these are some guys that are flying under the radar that I think are worth taking a look at. First one, not so under the radar, but probably gettable in a 1 QB league, even towards the back of the draft, is Dak Prescott from the Cowboys. He's been a top 5 fantasy QB before. They got one of the best wide receivers in the game in CeeDee Lamb. They finally added a legit wide receiver too in George Pickens, although we don't know how long that's going to last. But also tight end Ferguson is finally healthy. Also, they have no run game. I imagine they'll hopefully try and trade for somebody at some point. But for now, all they have is the pass. Their defense stinks. They just traded away their best defensive player, one of the best players in the league, for pennies on the dollar. They're going to need to score 1,000,000 points to have any chance of winning. And they ain't doing that running the ball. So draft Dak and enjoy it this season before Pickens flies off the rails and Dallas implodes in 2026. Next up is Jordan Love. He was a QB5 just 2 years ago. Last year he had a down year, but he played hurt for most of the year. Also, they finally got him some help in the draft at receiver with Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. And also, the guys who I think are actually his 2 best weapons, his tight ends, are finally both healthy. So I'm expecting Jordan Love to put up 2023 numbers this year in the revamped offense. So quickly, some other names I like. Drake May. He looked good when he played last year and now has a new coach and a new OC with a proven track record of success. Also, there were a few offseason improvements at the wide receiver room. And he has rushing upside, which gives him a solid floor and a high ceiling. Bryce Young. Deontay Johnson tried to ruin this poor man's career last year. Credit to Dave Canales for saving it. And honestly, credit to Bryce. It took big balls for him to come back and play the way he did in the second half of the season after laying such an egg, an absolute turd for the first part of the season. So good on him. I hope we continue to see him improve this year. Last, we got J.J. McCarthy. His coach is Kevin O'Connell, who last year Kevin O'Connell turned Sam Darnold into a 14-3 quarterback. They have weapons catching the ball. They have a great O-line to keep McCarthy upright. Plus, he's also got sneaky rushing upside. That's simple enough. That's it. Meditate on it and then stash JJ as a QB2, QB3 in your deeper Superflex leagues. I also had Caleb Williams on here for a second because I believe in Ben Johnson, not because I believe in Caleb. And I'm also already starting to hear that there's chatter around Lake Michigan about Tyson Bagent. And that's not good for Caleb. Caleb's also kind of a pussy. So if there's any type of quarterback controversy, I don't think he's going to handle it well. A couple super deep quarterbacks, since we don't have quarterbacks that are really going to be throwing on the taxi squad later. Kirk Cousins. Listen, he's old. I get it. Dude's my age. Not really. I wish I was his age. But football speaking, he's relatively old. And I really like Michael Penix, but he has an extensive injury history. He was in college forever because he kept getting hurt. If he or another quarterback goes down that's on a contender with an injury this year, I think we could see comeback Kirk pounding Roy Rogers sooner than we think. Anthony Richardson, we already talked about, and Jalen Milroe out of Seattle. So Jalen Milroe is Anthony Richardson done right. Like, he's a crazy athlete, but he's not NFL ready. And so Seattle, when they drafted him, they already had a veteran starter on the team in Sam Darnold, and they even had a legit backup quarterback in Drew Lock. That way, if Darnold gets hurt or isn't playing well, there's no pressure to rush the process and put Milroe in before he's ready. You just plug in Drew Lock. So now Milroe actually has the time to sit and learn the game. And with his arm and his running ability, he could eventually be an absolute weapon in this league, like Lamar Jackson style. He just needs the time to develop, and I think Seattle's giving him that and doing it the right way. Let's talk running backs. These are sleepers that you've probably heard of, but I think they're going to outperform where they're being drafted this year. First up, Chuba Hubbard out of Carolina. That Panthers offense was god-awful last year, and he kept it on track until the second half of the season. He was the only thing that looked good. And then he got a fat new deal as a thank you for that. He was a sneaky RB1 in fantasy last year, and he's being drafted as a low RB2 this year, even though he's on the same team in a much better offense. Isaiah Pacheco, true bell cow back. It broke out in his second year, finished as an RB1, was being drafted like an RB1 last year, and then he got hurt. And, there's recency bias, I guess, because nothing else has changed. He's healthy again. He's in that same role, looking like a true 3-down back. I don't see any reason why he doesn't put up RB1 numbers as long as he stays healthy, and he's being drafted as like an RB3. James Conner, Erie PA's finest. This dude is a true workhorse back. He produces year in and year out, and for some reason just never gets the respect he deserves. His ADP is always 8 to 10 spots below where he ends up finishing in terms of fantasy points. For some reason, we collectively just never adjust for that. I think it's probably because he's old. People would rather get out early than, get out late when it comes to running backs. But people have been waiting for him to fall off for like 3 to 4 years now, and he still hasn't. And he doesn't look like he's slowing down. I know he's a boring pick, but he is a reliable one. And that's the kind of value that can help you win your fantasy league. Cam Scatterbo, we talked about him quickly earlier. We all watched him put the entire Arizona State Sun Devils football team on his back, Greg Jennings style, and carry them through the college football playoffs. This dude could just straight up ball. Anyone with eyes can see that. This is just another case of NFL GMs overthinking it. He had a soft tissue issue that kept him out of training camp for a while this year, and it's caused his draft capital to drop a little bit. So I think by now, while everyone's still thinking this is only Tyrone Tracy's backfield, because Cam I think is one fumble away with Tyson or with Tyrone Tracy. That's pretty likely, and he might be working in as a timeshare or taking over totally. A few running backs that you might not have heard of and are going to be good deep RB stashes. Down in Dallas, we've got Jaden Blue and Phil Maffa. I think I mentioned this quickly earlier. The Dallas backfield is atrocious. Javonte Williams, unfortunately, he was a stud, but it looks like his career is over. It's been derailed by his knee injury. And Miles Sanders is just not good at football. He was never good at football. That's coming from a Penn State guy who irrationally loves every player from Penn State. Jaden Blue is a rookie out of Texas. He's going to be, I think, a good third down pass catching back. He hurt his ankle in camp, so that might slow his progress, but I think should be back soon. And then Phil Maffa is a bruiser, and he's actually my sleeper pick to take over this backfield entirely once he's healthy, assuming they don't trade for a vet. But he also got hurt and is starting the season on IR, so if you have an IR spot in your league, maybe pick him up and toss him on there. Otherwise, keep an eye out for him later in the season. Keaton Mitchell down in Baltimore is a third-year back who looked spicy 2 years ago as a rookie before blowing out his knee. He hardly played last year because he was coming back for his knee injury, but seems like he is back at full strength now. It sounds like he's going to be working kind of as a change of pace back alongside Derrick Henry, which gives him a little bit of standalone value. But if something were to happen to Henry, he could be a major contributor. Wide receivers. My boy Deebo Samuel is taking his talents to Washington. He's now in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. And they don't have a real bell cow running back other than possibly Bill. So I think that in addition to receptions, Cliff Kingsbury is going to scheme up all kinds of ways to get Debo involved in the run game. So, he's a yak beast. I think he's going to have a big season, and it won't cost you anything, to take a shot at it. Calvin Ridley, once upon a time, Calvin Ridley, he was an ATL. He's taking the reins from Julio Jones as the consensus wide receiver number one going in to 2021. And then it all fell apart. He walked away from the game due to mental health reasons for a little bit. Then he got suspended for gambling. And then he spent the last 2 seasons in QB purgatory with the likes of the Mayo King Will Levis, which that's not going to fix your mental health issues. So finally seems like he's got a real QB and a real coach and a real shot at resurrecting his career for, maybe one last year or two. Out in Vegas, we got Jakobi Meyers. Last year, with the worst quarterback play in the league, Meyers had 129 targets, which was 18th in the league, and was 20th in the league in receiving yards at just over 1,000 yards. This year, he's got a major upgrade at coaching, major upgrade at QB, and for some reason, his ADP is now wide receiver 41, 20 spots, 25 spots lower than where he finished last year. Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand it, but smash that draft button, baby. In Gino, we trust. Keon Coleman, Bills Mafia. Now, I'm a Bills guy, and when I heard the Buffalo Bills were going to be Hard Knocks this year, I would have bet you any money that Keon Coleman was going to be the star of the show, hands down. If you don't know, Keon Coleman's a weird, eccentric dude, but in like the most fun and entertaining way. He's built to be a reality TV star. And every year, there's one guy from Hard Knocks that gets a huge bump in fantasy and is drafted way higher than they should be because people love them on the show. Not only did Keon Coleman not get the bump this season, but he was actually featured in the show so little that I actually think his draft stock might have tanked as a result. So honestly, all right, let's give this another shot. Keon Coleman, Bills Mafia, baby. Listen, I'm a Bills guy, and when I heard the Buffalo Bills had Hard Knocks this year, I would have bet you any money that Keon Coleman was going to be the star of the show, hands down. Keon Coleman, if you're not aware, is a weird, eccentric dude, but in the most fun and entertaining ways. He's built to be a reality TV star, and every year there's one guy from Hard Knocks that gets a huge bump in fantasy and is drafted much higher than they should be, just because people love him on the show. Not only did Keon Coleman not get the bump this season, but he was featured in the show so little that I actually think his draft stock may have taken a hit and tanked as a result. Honestly, a little bit of a hot take, I'm not sure, maybe, but Hard Knocks this year just kind of sucked. Even as a Bills fan, wasn't into it. But Keon, last year, he looked good up until his injuries. He injured his hand. It sounds like he's all healed up heading into the season. Bills have the reigning MVP at quarterback. They were the number one offense last year. And if there's one wide receiver on the team that could make the jump and become a true wide receiver one in fantasy, it is Keon Coleman. And he's being drafted around wide receiver 50. You're not going to find a much better shot at a lottery ticket than that. Deep wide receivers. Let's go. So these guys you may or may not have heard of. First one is Isaac Tesla. So this is me trusting Dan Campbell, the Lions front office, because they traded 2 future third-round picks to move up and grab this guy who I had never heard of. And that's significant. It's significant when a team invests a single third-rounder to get a wide receiver. So 3 of them from a team that's been absolutely on fire in the draft the last few years, that's a signal that they think this kid's special. The one thing that stood out to me after he got drafted was his RAS score, which stands for Relative Athletic Score. It's one of the thousands of data points that's considered when evaluating talent. So without getting too into the weeds, it is what it sounds like. It's a way to measure someone's overall athletic ability. So it's on a scale from 0 to 10. They started tracking it back in 1987, and there have been 3,408 players who have had their RAS score evaluated since then. Isaac TeSlaa scored a 9.96 out of 10 and was the 16th highest score ever measured. Now, full disclosure, I had never even heard of an RAS score until I heard the stat. So I have no idea, how much value to actually put behind that. So, take it for what it's worth. But so far, it seems like a good pick. The Lions had actually signed veteran Tim Patrick to the squad before the preseason for him to be their wide receiver 3, thinking that TeSlaa was, more of a raw talent and would take a little bit of time to come along as a project. They just traded Tim Patrick a week ago. TeSlaa is already their wide receiver 3 heading into the season. So you probably don't need to grab him in redraft leagues, but in Dynasty, if he is still available on your waiver wire, scoop him up ASAP. Back to Green Bay, Savion Williams. The Green Bay wide receiver room is kind of trash. And this dude is Deebo Samuel 2.0. He actually had over 50 rushing attempts in his last year at TCU and was averaging well over 6 yards per carry. Dude's a weapon. Matt LaFleur will scheme up ways to get the ball in his hands. I think he's going to run the ball more than people expect in Green Bay, which gives him a higher floor than most rookies while he develops as a wide receiver. Seattle, Torrey Horton. Horton dropped in the draft value due to a knee injury last year, but the 2 years prior to that, he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, pretty much double-digit touchdowns each year. He was at Colorado State, and also when they played Colorado, he went up mano-a-mano against Travis Hunter and straight cooked him. He went to the Seahawks, like I mentioned, who have JSN and Cooper Kupp as their wide receivers 1 and 2. They actually signed MVS as their wide receiver 3, kind of similar to TeSlaa, so they could, take their time and bring Torrey Horton along. And just like Tim Patrick, the Seahawks cut MVS last week, and Horton is their wide receiver 3 going into the season. So he might be producing right away. And if something were to happen to Cooper Kupp, who is old and injury prone, or JSN, we could be looking at wide receiver 2 production from Torrey Horton almost immediately. Our last deep sleeper is Tez Johnson. I mentioned earlier Emeka Egbuka as the sleeper pick for Tampa Bay, but there's another rookie wide receiver there who has a chance to break out as well, and that's Tez Johnson. So if you see this dude on tape, he has it. He just pops on tape. He's electric. I remember watching him in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State, which is one of the best defenses in college football last year. And he put up 11 catches for 181 yards and a touchdown and was named MVP of the game. So the knock on him is he's undersized, like really undersized. This dude is like 160 pounds, but he is crazy quick and he is a yak beast. I actually just heard that Cade Otton for Tampa Bay is going to be out for game 1 of the season as well. So by default, the Vikes might not have any choice but to throw this guy the ball and give him a shot. I'm actually a bit afraid for this man's life on the field, but that's motivation. Better not get tackled because you might not survive if you do. Tight ends, we're wrapping up here, guys. Getting to the back half or the very end here. This is one of my favorite sleepers of the year. Harold Fannin of the Cleveland Browns. Behind the 2 first-round tight end picks in the draft this year, which were Loveland and Warren, Harold Fannin is my favorite tight end of the class. He broke every possible record for a tight end in his last year at Bowling Green. People discredit him because they're saying he was playing against inferior competition. But when Bowling Green played their 2 big power conference games last year, which were against Texas A&M and Penn State, he showed out big time. He put up a total of 19 catches for almost 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in those games. And Bowling Green had a chance to win both of those games, basically strictly because of Harold Fannin. His draft stock took a little bit of a hit really just based on measurables. They say he's too small to play in line and block, and he's not fast enough to play in the slot. But if you ask me, this is just NFL execs overthinking things because they think they're smarter than they really are. Last year he had the best statistical collegiate season of any tight end ever by a mile. Kevin Stefanski loves to play 12 personnel, and Harold Vanden is the perfect complement to line up with David Njoku in that formation. He's only 21 years old. He's been running with the ones in camp, and the coaches say they expect him to become somebody who contributes immediately this season. So he's my tight end 3 in this class, even though he's being drafted more like a tight end 6 or 7. So you can get him at a big discount. Oh, one more guy, Brenton Strange, another Penn State guy. I told you I'm a bit of a homer. In 2023, Evan Engram had 143 targets at Jacksonville. And last year he was pacing for the same way until he got hurt. And once Engram got hurt last year, Branch stepped in and he played awesome in his place to the point where Jacksonville shipped Engram off to Denver. So Strange is stepping in now as the tight end 1, and I could see him being the safety valve for Trevor Lawrence and possibly having close to 100 targets this season. A few other tight ends I like quickly. Dallas, Jake Ferguson, we mentioned him earlier. Washington, Zach Ertz was tight end 8 last year. He's 35 years old. This is probably his last season, but if you have a tight end injury issue or you have somebody who's just not producing, he is a plug and play option. And then the Texans, Dalton Schultz, he was tight end 3 like 4 years ago. Houston, that was when he was Dallas. He went to Houston. Houston just hasn't used him as a passing tight end for some reason. I'm not sure why, but their new offensive coordinator is a former tight end coach, and he loves tight ends. So I think we could see a little resurgence here. Okay, this is actually my last one before we get to Taxi Squad. It's a little 2-for-1 here in Green Bay with tight ends Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. They were drafted together in 2023 in the second and third round. Musgrave was first in the second round, then Kraft was in the third round. And they were brought in by LaFleur so he could run 12 personnel with them. And they did that in 2023, and they were really good at that. And the Packers offense was really good because these guys, I think, are the 2 best receiving options in Green Bay. The rookie season, Kraft played very well, and Musgrave actually set the Green Bay rookie tight end receiving record for catches in the season, and he only played 11 games. He was out the rest of the season because he had a freak injury, lacerated his spleen. And then last year he hurt his ankle and was out most of the year when Kraft stepped in his place and kind of exploded and became the tight end 1, and understandably and deservedly so. But for whatever reason, people have just written off Musgrave because he didn't perform, but it was entirely due to injury. So I'm not sure why. He is available in like 60%, 70% of leagues out there. So, Kraft is a great sleeper who I think could be a top 5 tight end this season. But he's going to cost you. You're going to have to pay something to get him, whether it's in draft capital or in trade value. Musgrave is like a deep sleeper, and I bet he finishes this year as a T2 or even TD1, and he's still only 24 years old, and it's going to cost you nothing. So very low risk, very high reward play. And this also, the Luke Musgrave take is by far the one I get made fun of the most by my friends. So I'm putting it on the record, on the internet. It's official. I can't wait to laugh in their faces when this hits. All right, real quick, Taxi Squad. These are dudes that probably won't produce this year. We're thinking more for next year, 2 years down the road. Starting with running backs, we got Will Shipley. Philly's got the best O-line in football. If Saquon were to go down, he's an immediate RB1. And if not, once Saquon hangs him up, I think he is probably the heir apparent in Philadelphia. DJ Giddens, 22-year-old rookie backup to Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor's amazing when he can stay healthy, but he tends to have trouble, doing that. Also, Taylor signed a massive contract a few years ago with the Colts, but they have an out in 2026 with a really small dead cap hit. So if they think Giddens is good enough and they're not competing and are going into rebuilding mode, I could see them moving on from Taylor and making Giddens their guy to save $30 million. LeQuint Allen, though running back in college football, caught more footballs than LeQuint Allen last season. He just turned 21. He's known for being a phenomenal pass protection back, which is the best way to get yourself on the field as a young running back. Problem is that he is in Jacksonville in that mess with Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, and Bishal Tootin. But those three guys are competing for a role. The Jags kept Allen on the 53-man roster. They kept 4 running backs, which is just not common. And I think that's because one of these dudes is getting shipped out of town. And once that happens, I think Allen steps in and becomes their third down passing back right away. If not, if they keep everybody at the end of this year, Etienne's contract is up. So he might leave in free agency or something's going to happen, but they're not going to have 4 running backs next year. And Allen's going to be the third down pass catching back, and he's going to be a PPR monster. Wide receivers, Tennessee, Alec Ayomanor. I think I'm definitely butchering that, but Calvin Ridley is the only wide receiver the Titans have right now, and he's like creeping into his 30s. When Ayomanor was at Stanford, his team faced off against Colorado. So it was Ayomanor versus Hunter, and it was a big storyline. Stanford was down 29-0 before Ayomanor put the team on his back and led the biggest comeback in Stanford history to beat Colorado 46-43. His final stat line for the game was 13 catches for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns. 7 of those catches for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns came when he was facing straight up man-to-man against Hunter, who is a generational talent. I know this is the second time I talked about, a receiver burning Hunter in college. I'm not saying Hunter was bad. I'm saying these dudes are just that good. He can ball out. He's gotten very little hype. He went to Tennessee, which doesn't have a great offense. So I think he's flying under the radar. And he's already been named as a starter this year. So, I think that the Titans offense isn't going to be good enough where even if as a starter, he can really produce. But next year, 2 years out, he's somebody you want to have your eye on. LA, the Rams. The Chargers. Jesus. San Diego Chargers. LA Chargers. Oh my God. Okay. Condre Lambert-Smith and Trey Harris for the LA Chargers. Both these guys had good camps. We thought one of them, or both of them even possibly, would be contributing this year. But then the Chargers went inside Keenan Allen. Ladd McConkey is the wide receiver 1. Keenan Allen is Justin Herbert's former teammate and a target hog at wide receiver 2. So these guys are only going to be rotating in occasionally this season. But in the future, whatever Allen hangs them up, they're going to have a chance to compete for significant action. New England, Efton Chisholm III. What a name. Undrafted free agent Efton Chisholm III. He was the darling of camp. He was drawn comparisons to former Patriots greats like Wes Welker and Julian Edelman, due primarily to his whiteness. But he surprised everybody. He easily made the 53-man roster. But Pop Douglas right now is the slot wide receiver. He's got that role wrapped up for the foreseeable future. I do think this dude is a great fit for the Josh McDaniels offense in that Edelman-Welker role. But, just like them, it took each of them a few years in the league before they ever really saw the field and made an impact. So I think he's in the same boat, but somebody to keep an eye on for maybe 2-3 years down the road. Oh my God, we're still going. I'm sorry, I didn't realize how long this was, and I significantly edited this down. So whatever, stick it out. We're almost at the end. We got one end of the receivers and tight ends, then we're done. Denver, we got 2 guys, second-year Troy Franklin and rookie Pat Bryant. Cortland Sutter's the wide receiver 1. He's coming up on 30. Marvin Mims is currently wide receiver 2, but he's really just been like a gadget player so far, not like a true route runner. So it sounds like they're giving Mims a shot to make the leap this year as the wide receiver 2, but if he doesn't, and which he hasn't so far, next year, one of these guys is taking that spot. Tight ends, Oronde Gadsden. He's a converted wide receiver who had a great final season at Syracuse after making the switch over to tight end. Lots of hype coming out of camp about his work ethic and how quickly he's coming along. A bit of a project buried on the depth chart behind a couple of vets for now, but once he learns the position, he's going to be a matchup nightmare for defenses. Theo Johnson, last Penn State guy, of course, another Penn State dude. Listen, it's not my fault. After Iowa, no team has been turning out tight ends lately like Penn State. This dude also had a crazy RAS athletic score, was earning targets last year, showed some flashes towards the end of last season, and already finds himself sitting atop the depth chart for the New York Giants. And with no other receiving options there besides Malik Neighbors, he could be breaking out this season, but at the latest, I think next season. And last, finally, Gunnar Helm. He was dominant at Notre Dame, was the best receiver they had on the field last year. He fell in the draft because he ran a slow 40 time at the combine after he twisted his ankle at the combine. It's so dumb. Like, NFLG, I don't get it. You watch this dude get hurt. He grunted it out and still competed and did all of his drills, and they were a little bit slower because you saw him get hurt, and yet they dinged him and treated it as if the injury never happened. I don't understand it. Great grab by the Titans. He already has claimed their tight end 2 spot, currently behind Chigakongwu, who they're expecting big things from this dude. Little wishy-washy on him, but because of that, Gunnar Helm might not get any opportunities really this year. Could be a year or two, unless they run 12 personnel with. I actually could see them doing that with 2 good tight ends. Couple other rookies people seem to like. Terrence Ferguson for the Rams, tight end. Same with Elijah Arroyo at Seattle and Mason Taylor at the Jets. But they ain't no Harold Fannin. Let's be serious. Now, good God, that was a lot of information I threw at you. Oh man, this thing ended up being an hour. I was shooting for a half hour. Whatever. Yeah. Thanks for sticking around. A lot of info, in particular the sleepers. Just to recap, because I am going on record, my top sleepers from the people we mentioned: Cam Scatterbo, Harold Fannin, Torrey Horton, Isaac Tesla, Keon Coleman, Travis Etienne, Deebo Samuel, Savion Williams, Tez Johnson, Hunter Renfrow, Oronde Gadsden, Brenton Strange, Luke Musgrave, Roman Wilson, LaQuint Allen. Just so you know, these guys are all guys that I own in my fantasy leagues. This is kind of my way of planting my flag, going on record, so I can point back to this at the end of the season and say, look how smart I am. Because let's face it, the best part about fantasy football is shit talking to your league mates. And, I'm out here putting my money where my mouth is. So I hope you enjoyed the first episode. From here on out, the plan is basically we're going to do 1 episode per week, probably on Tuesday before waiver claims are processed, where I'll have a guest. We'll talk about the previous week's games, who was good, who was bad, who should be claimed off waivers. Then we'll do a little preview for the next week that's upcoming for any games or players that we think stand out we want to focus on. And maybe once I actually know what I'm doing, and it's easy to produce these episodes, I'll add in more than 1 per week. But, for now, baby steps. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry this was so long. Oh, we're figuring it out, guys. We're figuring it out. But this is good info, so you're welcome for that. If you have any friends who love fantasy football, think they would enjoy the show, tell them to check it out. If you have any questions about who you should pick up off waivers, who to target for trades, shoot me a DM or a voice memo on Instagram at the Taxi Squad Pod. And if you have a second, you wouldn't mind leaving a 5-star review, it would be greatly appreciated. I fully understand that this was not a 5-star quality episode, but you can lie. It's the internet. Nobody checks. So you can also not leave a review at all. That's fine too. So, all right, for now, that's it. Welcome to the squad. Let's get ready for some football.